Where in your life do you or do you not have or see freedom?
I have freedom in my head because I can think about anything I like. I have freedom in some parts of the landscape sometimes, where you feel free. And I think I have freedom in my close relationships with my family and my close friends. I don't feel restricted in who I am and what I can say and how I can be. And I suppose in the broader world, that notion of absolute freedom doesn't really exist because you're always, in some ways, you have to be respectful of other people and the rules that exist around how we behave towards each other, and the rules that just allow us all to coexist within the world that we've created. And without those boundaries, it would be very difficult for everybody to find the space just to be able to carry on comfortably. So I think there are places where there are restrictions, where there are not absolute notions of freedom, but actually in some ways that is about being able to exist comfortably. So you accept those, and that's part of the deal that you have. So yeah, I think there are probably more places that I feel not entirely free or conscious of how to be, than there are places where I just don't have to bother about it at all.
Does judgment from society restrict your freedom to present yourself how you wish? If so, or if not, why?
I think it probably does. I think, again, it goes back to that thing about being conscious of, other people and the way in which we have to respect others' sensibilities in order to be in coexistence. So I think that's part of it. Although I don't feel overly bound by having to be anything in particular in order to fit in anywhere. So I don't have to wear a suit or a tie unless I want to wear a suit or a tie. I don't feel forced into any conformity in terms of my workplace or my socializing places. I feel fairly relaxed that I'm not bound by any excessive sense of rules round about those things. But yes, I think I am conscious of other people and in a way not wanting to aggravate them or to make their lives uncomfortable, and I think often that is then reflected in trying to accommodate other people and to make sure that other people are sort of comfortable in the world. So sometimes that may be a little bit self-conscious in terms of how you are then with other people rather than ignorant to other people's presence.
How do you think freedom has changed since World War II or in your lifetime?
Well, I was born in 1965, so I'm part of a generation in which we were very conscious as I grew up of the Second World War and the stories and the narratives of the Second World War, and how it had created, in a way, how the world that was then being built and that I was growing up into was only there because people had given their lives in order to defend us from fascism and the Nazis. So there was a great deal of culture around that period of time. So lots of films, lots of toys, lots of cartoons and magazines and books and stories. There's a whole post-war industry around retelling the story of the Second World War. And even if you just think, and that went through into the 80s and the late 80s, that was still very prevalent in our culture. So you'd have things, programs like, for example, Tenko, which was a story about a television program about female prisoners of war in Japan during the Second World War, which was phenomenally popular TV series. So it was always culturally part of the story of the Second World War, was always culturally a part of my growing up. And you were always very conscious of the fact that the freedoms that you had, the opportunities that were going to exist for us, had been given to us by those who had died and fought and survived and suffered under the 1939 to 1945 period of time. That had, the cost of that had paid for the world that we were going to create and live in, and that to a certain extent there was a debt to be honoured in that. I think we've become less connected to those stories because we're not told in the same way anymore. And those people who went through that period of time are fewer in number, obviously, and so we're drifting away from the direct point of contact to that, or contact once removed from that period of time. So I think that we're, in some ways, we are less conscious of the need to be engaged with protecting freedoms that we have. We perhaps give them away more easily now than we used to. But then on the flip side of that is that there are certain social freedoms and things which are allowed now, or that happen now, that were not allowed in my childhood. So gay marriage is now part of our cultural way of being, which is a great thing. I think we are, in some respects, we went through a period of more openness in the late 90s and the early 2000s. I think that is being challenged at the moment by notions of what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed, particularly around issues of gender, sexuality, and race. I think these have all come back into a much more contentious debate around all of that, which in some ways I think we got beyond that, but we haven't actually. So I don't know, I think, are we more free now than we were at the end of the Second World War? In some respects, yes, we are, undoubtedly. I think, particularly in the Western world, there's been a lot of freedom. I think we spent a lot of that freedom unwisely. I think we've used our freedoms and our fiscal power and the freedom that buys, and we spent it unwisely. And whether we'll get a second chance to spend those assets that we've used or not depends very much on our behaviour now and what we do in the next 20, 30 years, really. Yes, more free, but in some respects, and hopefully emotionally and morally slightly more free than we were at the end of the Second World War. But I think we've possibly created a world in which we will have to be more disciplined in how we spend that freedom, particularly with the resources of the planet, than otherwise we would have to have been had we been more conscious of the value of what we were spending since the Second World War, really, in terms of how we've used material offer that the planet's had for us. So, mixed bag, I think.
How do things such as race, gender, disability, sexuality and wealth affect your or other people's freedom?
I don't think any of these things affect my freedom directly, because I'm a white male, so and I'm not disabled. So I am one of the lucky in that respect, that I'm not bound by a physical disability in a world that doesn't necessarily recognise that. So that gives me certain opportunities that a lot of people don't get given. So I recognise that I'm very fortunate in terms of where I'm from an advanced world's economy. So I have the benefit of good food, good healthcare, good housing, and so on and so forth. So I've been lucky in my life to have access to all these things in a really fortunate way. I recognise, well, that in lots of other people and in the greater world picture, there are lots of cultures who don't have these advantages, and that there are lots of cultures that are negative towards people because of race, because of gender, because of sexuality, because of disability. I think there's lots of people in lots of parts of the developed world and the developing world that are discounted as a result of those things. So for me personally, it's not a direct impact, but when I look at the broader world that we live in, you see just how far we have to go before people are genuinely living in equitable circumstances and therefore have shared notions of freedom, shared rights, and equalities that make a difference. So, not me personally, but I know that I'm one of the lucky few, I think.
Can you tell me about a place or places that you do or don't have freedom?
Well, I think freedom's a feeling as much as it's a state of being. And the places I feel free are in nature, so in a landscape, generally speaking, without too many other people. So in a place that allows me room and space to engage with something that's not asking me to define myself, I suppose. So I feel free when I'm on a walk in the hills. I feel free when I'm, at the edge of the sea, on a beach. I don't run so much, but I used to run a lot, and running is always a space in which you feel released and free, because it's very simple. You're moving through space, and you're in a way released to just be a physical entity, and that your process of thought is the rhythm of breath and the rhythm of a run, and that's a very free place to be. And when I'm directing with actors, I feel very free in a rehearsal room when I'm in a space with a group of artists who have a common goal, with no barriers around how we create work. So that's a space I always feel very liberated in as well.